In 1966, Buick came out with the gorgeous second generation Riviera, a very strong follow-up to a beautiful 1963 to 1965 first generation Riviera. And the second generation Riv was especially successful and built on the success of that first generation. In fact, in the 1966 model year, Buick sold 45,348 Rivieras compared to 34,586 Rivieras in 1965. The car was generally quite the hit and was a pretty pricey car at the time. Base price was $4,424. That translates to about $40,000 today, and you could easily option these vehicles up to stickers north of $5,000, even $5,500, as everything was optional, including power windows, locks, air conditioning, tilt wheel, cruise control, etc. Overall, the Riviera was certainly a distinct design for the second generation, although it shared a number of components with the Oldsmobile Tornado as well as the Cadillac Eldorado, including the front glass and A-pillars. The Buick and the Tornado also shared a roof panel, though the Eldorado had its own unique roof panel. This was also the last year for the Buick Nailhead under hood, and it was 425 cubic inches and made 340 horsepower. As 1966 turned into 1967, the Riviera saw a few minor changes. The first being the block lettering up front was changed to a Riviera script over on the driver's side of the hood, and the front grille was altered a bit to have this prominent center line similar to the Grand Sports from 1966. And by the time 1968 rolled around, it was time to refresh the Riviera a little bit, and GM came out with a new design. Recall, this was the era that Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, was published, and GM was becoming rather sensitive to safety, or at least the appearance of safety in some cases, in this time period. And so the 1968 Riviera came equipped with this full, large, loop chrome bumper up front to give it that air of safety. It was still not a 5-mile-an-hour bumper. Those wouldn't come until the 1973 model year up front. But it did at least serve as a visual cue to signify that GM was getting more serious about styling. The 1968 Riviera style also evolved as the car now had hidden wipers for the first time, and out back there were new taillight treatments. Let's take a walk around this beautiful 1968 Riviera that I recently saw at the Motor Muster car show in Dearborn, Michigan. It's owned by a friend named Doug. Now, the first thing to note about this vehicle is that it's an interesting color. It's called Silver Beige Mist Iridescent, and it's an absolutely beautiful color in the sunlight here. It's not quite silver, it's not quite beige, it's a metallic paint, and it really shows off the surfacing on this vehicle extremely well. You can see the hood popped in this case and the hidden headlights that are rotated in the up position. Those headlights, when you activate them, just simply rotate down via electric motor 90 degrees. It's a very, very simple setup, not like the pneumatic systems on other vehicles. And these beautiful road wheels, I think, really set off the car quite well. You can also see the side marker light there because there's no wraparound turn signal on this particular vehicle, and that was required by law by this point. Now let's walk around the back and see this tail lamp treatment. You can also see the vents there on the tulip panel above the trunk that were for the flow-through ventilation system. Notice the rear end treatment has that W shape that was characteristic of Buick during this era, and the relatively full-width taillights, also a really nice touch. The side marker light there has the Buick logo on it. This car does have a tan vinyl top, and normally I don't care for vinyl tops on cars, but I think it actually looks quite handsome on this vehicle. 1968 was a relatively successful year for the Riviera. I mentioned that in its first year, it sold about 46,000 units, and by 1968, it sold 49,000 units. 1969 would be a similar style, and the Riv would sell almost 53,000 units before, in 1970, its last year, it would sell just 37,000. So this was a very, very popular car. You can see with the hood down, that big loop bumper I was talking about to give it that air of safety. I also love the surfacing on the hood there, where it has this little divot, I guess you could call it, on either side of the vehicle, just giving it some extra surface tension and dimension. And by 1968, this Riviera was equipped with Buick's 430 cubic inch V8. That was the top engine that you could get. It was standard. It made 360 horsepower, so a little bit more than the old nailhead. And these 430s were relatively good engines, although they did have some oiling problems. Buick oil pumps, in some cases, were a bit weaker than other GM divisions. But aside from that, the 430 cubic inch V8s in the 1967 and 68 model years had solid push rods, and if you didn't change the oil frequently, it did have some upper end oiling issues. So something to bear in mind if you have one of these vehicles. But otherwise, very reliable engines overall, although I don't like changing water pumps on these with that aluminum timing cover and relatively small bolts. These are bolt breakers. If you want to change a water pump, I highly recommend you have a qualified mechanic do it. Let's turn to the inside for a minute here, and you can see in 1968, they redid the instrument cluster, and it no longer had that rotating drum, and you have the super soft touch material everywhere as well. Buick was trying to emphasize crashworthiness, so the instrument panel is very soft touch. See that rectangular style dashboard, the square speedometer, that rolling drum was gone from the 1966 and 7 model years. This car does have a bench seat in it, which was typical for most Rivieras of the time. Buckets were optional, but very rarely ordered. And out back, I would just want to show you again this beautiful paint, the silver beige iridescent. You can see all the surfacing of the vehicle, and I think it's just a spectacular color on this car. I don't think I've ever seen one in this color. And once again, you can see that W-shaped rear end. This is an interesting feature on these 68 Rivieras because the front end isn't all that W-shaped anymore by the 1968 model year. This is really a holdover from the 1966 and 67 versions that had that W-shaped front end. And I don't know if it goes as well on this vehicle. The back doesn't seem like it's congruent with the front. Notice it's not really a W shape. It just has that point in the front of it as opposed to the 1966 and 7 model years. And you can also see a little bit of that Buick 430 cubic inch V8 lurking under hood. Buick in these eras, some people say they underrated their engines. I don't know about that. Everybody was using gross horsepower figures, which were pretty liberal, shall we say, at the time for rating horsepower. But they certainly did have a lot of torque, and it moved the vehicle with good speed. And this was just a wonderful luxury cruiser. These Rivieras had full four-coil suspension and were rear-wheel drive, despite their siblings, the Eldorado and the Tornado, being front-wheel drive and not having full coil suspension. In fact, having torsion bar front suspension and single-leaf rear springs out back. So these Rivs did ride a lot better than their Eldorado and Tornado counterparts, although I would say if somebody can spot that 1968 Ford XL there, the green one, that's owned by my friend Tony, that Ford XL definitely rides better than this Riviera. Hope you enjoyed this spotlight on the 1968 Riviera. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.